Concerning the economically unstable times that we live in, it is a great idea to convert some of your savings into real money. Now, there is a big difference between real money and what we call money, which is actually just currency. So our dollar is currency, which fluctuates. Real money, on the other hand, like silver, for example, is a store of value over time. The best way to think of it is like this. If you had saved $1,000 in cash back in the late 60s, the late 1960s, that $1,000 would still be $1,000 technically, but it would buy you significantly less today due to inflation. Now, if you had saved that same $1,000 in silver back in the 1960s, today it would be worth around $28,000. So one of the best ways to protect your purchasing power is in real money, more specifically, silver. You can buy and have the metal shipped discreetly to your door, and what most people don't know is that you can actually convert your IRA or even a 401k into physical silver rather than having all of your life savings tied up in the paper fiat system, which is subject to hyperinflation. Go to dailyrenegade.com and click on the Cornerstone Assets Metals banner. This is the only company that I personally trust with this kind of thing. Click on that and sign up to get your free silver report today. One of the financial experts will speak with you to find out the best way to protect your savings going forward in these uncertain times. Hello and welcome to the Sharpening Report. I am your host, Josh Peck, and we have a very special show for you tonight. We welcome on hosts of the very popular Blurry Creatures Podcast to talk about one of my favorite subjects of all time, and one that we actually haven't really been able to cover much lately, Bigfoot. So for the first time ever, let's welcome to the show Nate Henry and Luke Rodgers. How are you guys doing?
Good, how are you?
Great. Good to see you, Josh.
Yeah, good to see you.
Good to be here, man. Yeah.
Glad to finally be able to have you on the show. I know that we've been trying to schedule this for a while, and just everybody's schedule's hectic, but finally we're here, and it's all in God's perfect timing. So since it's the first time on the show, we do have a bit of a tradition here. So go ahead, introduce yourselves. Tell us about your testimonies, how you came to know Jesus, and how that led to what you do today. Either one of you can go first. Up to you guys.
Sure, I guess I'll go. I remember I grew up in the church. My family was Christians, and I remember being around 10 and asking some harder questions. It's kind of hard because I heard the gospel message probably 100 times at school and at church, but I think I got very serious about it when I was around 10 years old, and I remember praying with my sister. But and I remember just having just a different feeling after that. It just changed, and I became more serious, and I remember talking to a lot of people about it, teachers and things. But yeah, I've been fortunate enough to been in a lot of different Christian groups growing up. Sometimes it felt like I was in a bubble though, because you're submersed in Christian culture. Northern California kid. Grew up in Sacramento, California, and then actually met a bunch of Luke's friends in college, and that was kind of our connection. Luke's grew up pretty close to me, but started a band in college, which kind of like sort of got me out of California and started traveling, meeting other people. But yeah, I'll let Luke go now.
Yeah, I mean, similar, Josh. Like I was raised in the church. If we go all the way back, my folks, my mom was a believer and my dad was not. And there's a great story. I was told on my 21st birthday, which is hilarious. My mom was like, "Do you want to know about how you were conceived?" And this show's going to take a hard right. But essentially, my dad was not a believer. My parents separated their first year of marriage. And I start here because it's a pretty amazing story of, how I'm even here. My parents met in college, and they were managing an apartment complex for a property management company, and all the paperwork started coming in very, very sloppy because my mom had gone home and left my dad the first year. And so the guy that owned the property management company came and found my dad, and he was a wreck, and led him to Christ. And my dad went back and begged for my mom, went to my grandparents' porch and begged for my mom to take him back, and she did. And the story goes that was the night of my conception, which is really awful to think about as a with your parents. But I kind of go there. I kind of go there first because that's the legacy I get in my family, is that God really brought my parents back together and changed my dad's life for the better. And I think a lot of church kids do this. I think I accepted Christ when I was like 4 in church. But my story really is, we moved around a lot as I was a kid. I'm from Chico, California, which is about an hour and a half north of where Nate grew up. Been in Tennessee for 10 years now, so I consider myself a Tennessean. I beat all the other Californians out here. But my story with my faith really became real in high school. I switched schools a bunch. I actually switched high schools. We moved when I was a kid. We moved around a bunch and moved to Portland, Oregon. My dad went back to school when I was 12, so I did junior high in the first year of high school in Portland. This is before Portland got really wacky, because this is in the 90s, and moved back to Chico, switched high schools, and switching high schools when you're a high school age kid, going from having a friend group to no friend group, and then being a new kid again, and I really wanted to fit in, and I was an athlete, and so that was what I did. My senior year, I had some things happen, right? Some really unfortunate things. God was in, and it sounds funny to almost think about now, but I was a basketball player. That was really my sport. And we never played Nate's team. I wish we had now. We could have some great stories about battling back in the high school days. We never played any teams in SAC, but I got inexplicably cut my senior year after leading us in scoring my junior year from the basketball team. And it kind of shattered me. That was my identity. And, I'd always lived under the umbrella of my parents' faith at that point, but I really kind of hit rock bottom. It sounds funny to think about, but I had kind of developed my whole identity in who I was and what I did and playing sports. And when that was pulled out from under me, which is funny because the assistant coaches came and told me afterwards it's the worst thing they've ever been a part of. The head coach was the one that did this, and he was the one that made this decision apart from from them. And long story short, I was just, I was trying to figure out who I was. And I remember sitting into my bed in my senior year and just saying, God, if you're real, I need something. I just feel, empty. And I honestly feel like God, Jesus gave me a hug that night. I can't explain it except that my senior year, my faith became real, and it changed everything. I lost all my friends, really. I felt like because of, I was no longer playing hoops. That was my thing. And God kind of replaced that with people that were following him. And I really caught fire. It was really a crazy time, man. I went to the Call DC that year. If you remember any of that stuff, Benny Hinn and Lou Engle, but it was supposed to be 1 million kids were going to be on the mall in DC. And as, as hokey as that sounds, and even some of those folks that are there now that were there, it was transformative for me. And, I really found my own faith, and it was real. It was real to me. And, then after college, the first time at college, I took a year off and actually moved to Australia, and I was a YWAMer. So I had this crazy idea at the age of 22 that, I just was pre-med and was going to go to med school, took the MCAT and all these things, and felt like I wasn't sure I wanted to do that, which is, of course, is very much a young person thing to do. But I figured if I took a year and gave it to God, that he would show me what he wanted to do with my life. And so I also figured I wanted to go surf somewhere. So I moved to Australia when I was 22, 23, spent a year doing YWAM in Australia. And God also rocked me there. I saw people get radically healed. I saw people come to Christ. I saw demonized people. It was eye-opening. And I also lived in an orphanage in Thailand for a couple months, which really gave me a heart for kids, abandoned kids as well, which continues today. I really spend a lot of my time that I have, outside of stuff, working with organizations that work against human trafficking, et cetera. That's really a big part of what I do. But, and then this whole Blurry Creatures journey has been so fascinating. We started out, just asking questions about Bigfoot, and because as we joke, it's the gateway drug, but really, it's covertly we're just asking about the weird stuff and how to interpret the things that we call supernatural, or things that these enigmatic experiences that people have, and trying to interpret that all through a biblical worldview. And it's really been we call it a journey podcast. It's really been a journey for me and in my faith as well, understanding and looking to understand the weird parts of the Bible, and talking to theologians and people that have had weird experiences, and then folks like yourself that are working, writing the books, the putting in 10,000 hours on these topics that I feel are so important, in our culture in this day and time. We've walked through some very weird years since 2020, when Nate and I really launched this show, in the middle of all that. And everything from, the narratives that are pushed on you, and understanding that much of what we're told isn't true, to, this last year, the House Oversight Committee in Congress holding court, if you will, on with whistleblowers on the UAP UFO stuff, and we've been sort of fortuitously and also just interestingly enough been in the midst of this as it's happening, and so you can't help but have your faith changed. And the people like the Dr. Michael Heisers, and that we had a chance to develop a relationship with before he passed away, guys like him, Doug Van Dorn, Dr. Judd Burton, the Ryan Pittersons, and those people of the world, like L.A. Marzulli, Tim Alberino, those folks getting to have a chance to speak with those folks and really learn, and then also take in a lot of their research and their knowledge has been transformative, at least for me, and I know for Nate as well.
That's amazing. Yeah. And I absolutely share those sentiments too with all those people. It's like, that I grew up in church as well, and I had tough questions that they really couldn't answer. And the very long story short, later on in life, it led me to L.A. Marzulli was like my open door to all this stuff. And then after just studying, getting to know what the research says and all that, and then becoming part of it myself and doing my own research and writing my own books and stuff, it's like, wow, I really found my family here, and it's been like that ever since. And I'm so glad that you guys are part of it. And like I mentioned at the top of the show, or actually I might have mentioned that before we started recording, but you guys have an amazing audience. And what I really want to do is introduce you guys to my audience and my audience to your audience, because they're so similar. And so I went on in prep for this show, I went on the official Blurry Creatures Facebook group and asked your fans what most they'd want me to ask you, and I got an overwhelming response. It was amazing, and we definitely won't be able to get to all of these, but there are a few here that I really want to do. So to start, and I'll just do first names only, just in case, because it is a private group. I don't want to embarrass anybody inadvertently, but Joseph had a really good first couple of questions that I think lays out the foundation. And of course, it's the first question that you asked new guests on your podcast as well. It was the first thing you asked me, and that was fun. So what are your thoughts on Bigfoot? Let's jump right into it, and you both can take it. Whoever wants to take it, whoever wants to go first, go for it.
I think your thoughts on Bigfoot have to evolve. I think that's like what I think Bigfoot is now versus what I thought he was a couple of years ago versus what I thought he was when I got into the topic around 2012, 2010, somewhere in there. At first you think Bigfoot's just this animal, it's just this thing roaming in the woods. It takes a lot of work to convince yourself that it's even out there, that there's evidence. We talk a lot of skeptics listen to our show, and people will say this. And I had a friend that I was talking to the other day that said something interesting, that says our faith, all of our faith is based on eyewitness accounts. And to me, that was just like a simple statement, but it made a lot of sense. Like what we believe is based on eyewitness accounts, that people have seen Christ, people experienced him, and then saw him, a resurrected Christ, and then ascend. So that's a huge part of our faith, is this eyewitness accounts. And yet we're so skeptical about other people's eyewitness accounts to other things. And the reason Bigfoot was the beginning of our show is because it's by far the most reported and seen cryptid creature out there. More people see this specific guy than anything. So to lay the foundation is as you slowly accept that, okay, I don't believe all thousands and thousands of people are lying to me about this creature, but you start to look into the accounts and they're all sort of similar. But eventually the accounts get strange. They start to change. You start to hear other weird stuff, like there's sort of this paranormal things that go along with Bigfoot. We've interviewed several people on our show that this thing's communicated with them telepathically. How does that make sense? Are they lying to us? But these are the stories that a lot of the Bigfoot groups can't handle. They don't want to. They just want to think this is just this remnant ape that has been around and he's just really smart. So is Bigfoot, I think the question I'm asking myself now, is this Bigfoot's origin? Was he supposed to be here on Earth, or was he somewhere else? Was he brought here from somewhere else? Because he's often a very confused creature. It's almost like he doesn't understand where he is, why he's here, or he's confused by human beings. So, they'll have run-ins with humans, and it's almost a strange interaction. And you got to think, like, if Bigfoot's been around a long time, animals have adapted to humans. Usually when animals sees a human, they take off running. They kind of know what humans are. Bigfoot doesn't really act like that. So I not only do I think it's got paranormal abilities, but I wonder if it was conceived here, if it was originally a thing of Earth. And as we've learned on our show, there's a lot of things that come from other places. And that's a hard thing. Some people's paradigms, they especially people who have very specific views about the shape of the earth and other things, they don't want to bring in anything outside of the world into their worldview. But as Luke and I have found on our show, you have to expand your paradigm. Sometimes in the middle of an interview, what the heck, if this person's telling us the truth, then this blows up a lot of my thoughts I have. So every day it evolves, but I wonder if Bigfoot somehow was dropped off on a UFO or something here. I mean, I know it sounds nuts, but now we have our government saying that we don't know what these UFOs are, and whistleblowers coming out, and these stories have been going on for decades about things coming and going. But there's lots of stories with the Sasquatch and seeing strange lights and UFOs, but it's a strange creature. I wonder if it. I don't know if I think that it's just this ape that sort of survived all these years. I think it seems to be an intelligent creature, and I wonder if it's terrestrial.
That's awesome. How about you, Luke?
I mean, listen, it's funny. Before, when Nate asked me in 2019 if we wanted to start a Bigfoot podcast or do a podcast on Bigfoot, yeah, I was like, right, yeah, absolutely. I think I started watching Finding Bigfoot somewhere in the early 2010s, right? It's been around since 2011, 12 seasons, and they still haven't found him, which I think is fascinating, right? Like, people will argue that they find new species of animals all the time, which they do, but they're all tiny. So there's this enigma with Bigfoot where it's this large animal, allegedly, that people can't bring in, and as we've gone down this path and delved into this topic, there's just, as Nate said, there's too much weird stuff. The Bigfoot community is divided between folks that think this is a remnant ape and sort of a Gigantopithecus and lives out in the woods and is just very elusive, and then of course there's the other camp which they call the woo, right, which is that there's all these weird things that surround this creature that we can't explain. And I think where I've landed is that there's something very odd about this creature because they can't pull any bodies or bones or anything out of the woods. And there are enough stories, like as Nate said, like mind speak or people having experiences where they kind of get this dematerializing or Bigfoot just disappears in front of them, where there's something that's, I don't know, supernatural or interdimensional, if you will, about this creature. And if we look at Einsteinian physics and the Einstein-Rosen bridge idea talk about portals, which is a lot of terminology that just talks about, quantum physics and the ability of things to be in our realm and then not in our realm. I think that's kind of where I'm landing here. This is a creature, that may be a chimera, maybe a remnant from the pre-flood, but definitely somehow is able to be in our realm and then not in our realm, which it is fascinating to sort of dive into. And I think I point to a couple things which I think are most interesting. If you talk about the Skinwalker Ranch, story of a portal opening up, and these are ranchers telling the story. This is before it was ever a research place or before it was bought, to be studied. There were cattle ranchers there, and there's a story of a portal or a window opening up, as it would be, above the ranch, and a Bigfoot creature climbing out. And I don't think there's a lot of reasons for a cattle rancher to make stuff up like that. In fact, you look insane now to talk about that. But the idea that these things are here and then not, that there are anecdotal stories surrounding this thing that have to do with UAPs and UFOs, that people have enough stories, hunters, et cetera, of having encounters in the forest where they know it's really not something they've ever seen before, and at the same time sort of dematerializes or disappears, adds this element of there's something, I believe supernatural to this creature that allows it to be here in this realm and then not. And that's taken me a long way with 3 years of talking about this and listening to interviews and listening to stories. And as Dr. Michael Heiser famously said on our show, if even one of these stories is true, it breaks the paradigm. And there are too many of these, right, that are for it to be there, everyone to be lying. And so that's where I land with Bigfoot.
Yeah, that's really amazing. And I share a lot of those same views, because I started off just thinking that it was, if it exists, it's just some animal we haven't discovered. But then it's like, how can we discover all these like really, really rare like species of insects and stuff that should be impossible to find, yet we can't find this big lumbering giant in the
right.
forest.
It was leaving footprints and butt prints and breaking trees and all these things, right? Like it's that's a tough one. And I think that's why we called it the gateway drug, Josh, is like once you start to look into this, you go, man, like what else out there isn't, falls into this space, and how are we meant to contextualize this, right? And that's and here we are.
Yeah, and you might have already answered this with that, but this connects with what we're talking about. Jennifer asks, Luke sounds like he starts out the podcast skeptical and then starts believing more as time goes on. I want to know what really hit him to make him a believer in more than just giants. And you might have already answered that, but do you have anything to add to that?
No, I think I tend to sort of skew to being a skeptic still. And I think, I think it's healthy in a lot of ways to, the Bible says to test the spirits, and I think it's to chew the meat and spit out the bones idea. But, I think really diving into the unseen realm stuff with Heiser, and then also, the volume of data really, right, is starting to, when you're talking to people every week that are, you spent the 10,000 hours and are the experts in their field, whether you agree with everything they say or not, because most of the time we don't agree with everything, right? There's a process for taking things in and deciding, where do I want to put this in my box or my paradigm. But I think, between all of the expert interviews and then all of the anecdotal stuff, you can't help but start to be swayed, especially I think when we want to filter everything through the biblical narrative and through a biblical lens, and that's because that's our faith, right? And so the more that I begin to understand and sort of the Genesis 6 paradigm, especially, and the divine counsel stuff in Psalm 82, and just starting to unwrap a lot of those things, 3 years ago, because I really hadn't done a ton of that before the show. It really provided a pathway for a lot of these things to make sense to me. The minute you start to understand that there was an angelic rebellion that involved the mixing of DNA and species, if you will, right, between humans and the angelic race, And understand that was the view of ancients all the way up until 300, 400 AD, right? This is what everyone believed until the time of Constantine, and sort of when they wanted to make this a little more palatable for whatever reason. That to me was like, wow, okay, this actually plugs in and makes a lot of these things make sense. And then and then going through and understanding a lot of what is happening, in the reality of a supernatural realm is really allowed these things to make a lot of sense. And so, yeah, I mean, am I fully convinced on everything? Of course not. Am I skeptical of most things? Absolutely. But I think this creates a plausibility, I don't know, Venn diagram, if you will, for a lot of these things to be like, yeah, absolutely. I mean, if you take in the data and the anecdotal, minus us pulling a body out of the woods, or digging up giant bones in our backyard, et cetera, there are very, very compelling cases, I think, would be won in a court of law that these things exist, and this is the actual explanation. And so that's maybe a long answer, but I'm a slow burn, so it's taken me a little while to get here. And and Nate, as he famously talks about before this podcast, he spent 10,000 hours listening to Bigfoot podcasts and remodeling houses, and so he was a bit farther down the road than I was, even though I'd spent I don't know 10 years watching Finding Bigfoot. It was just renamed to Looking for Bigfoot because they never find him. So.
Well, that's a really great segue for our next question, because that's something I've wondered a lot about too. Like, where does this fit in with the Bible? And Lisa asks, does the Bible refer to anything that could have been Bigfoot? And she also asks where the most Bigfoot sightings ever occurred. But yeah, that biblical connection I think is really interesting, and a lot of people will usually immediately go to Genesis 6. So what are your guys' opinions on that? Is there a connection between Bigfoot and the Nephilim of Genesis 6? And are there any other places in the Bible, or even extra biblical text or anything that you're aware of, where Bigfoot might fit in?
Some people bring up, like, there's a couple lines in the book of Jasher that talk about, there are these ape-like creatures, but I don't know. I've read that. That could go either way. It could be interpreted a couple different ways. Obviously, the Genesis 6 account, we knew there were like hybrids and chimeras and all kinds of creatures. It seems like the giants are more human. They build things. They have civilizations. They have a language. They sort of do their own thing. And I think that Bigfoot's sort of outside of that. I definitely think that, when you look into like the Ron Moorhead accounts where you have these lights and you have these weird orbs floating through the forest and they have this language. Some people have slowed down Bigfoot's language, and it's almost like they're speaking, 400 times fast, or four times faster than we speak. And I don't know. I mean, I don't really see a lot of biblical connections to Bigfoot. There could be, like we've said, there's a way to connect the dots a little bit with some conjecture of saying, well, there's, we knew there were, according to the ancients, there were, chimeras, which are two different types of beings put together running around. So it could be that there's this human side of Bigfoot, and then there's this primate side of Bigfoot. But I don't know. It seems to be, to me, I don't. I think we all want to believe, especially in the paranormal space, that every single ancient creature that was sort of rumored to exist did. But who knows? Who knows what actually was they were able to pull off? But I think Bigfoot. I don't think there's a lot of specific reference to it, biblically speaking.
I think too, one of the things that's fascinating when you go from anecdotal, right? Like, I mean, obviously Gen 6, all flesh was corrupted, right? So you have this idea that those that fell, the Watchers, were also doing, animalistic experiments in addition to the human ones. So you kind of have that as a predication for perhaps the creation of a chimerical creature like Bigfoot. But what I think is fascinating is when you talk to hunters that see him and they get a Bigfoot in the scope, and a lot of them say they can't pull the trigger because it's too human, which is a really, really interesting and fascinating observation, because the magnitude of pulling in a Bigfoot, and maybe the monetary reward for doing that it seems very enticing, and yet they can't do it. So there's something really, really odd about that, and I don't know. I think we'll just lean on the idea that there was a lot of chimerical creatures that have been reported throughout mythos and history, and Gen 6 talks about all flesh, and I think that's really where we land. But as far as where they're seen the most, that's pretty easy. The Pacific Northwest is the epicenter. It's the apex of the vortex, if you will. Washington State, almost double the amount of accounts in Washington State than the next biggest state, which is, I believe, is California. About 9 sightings per 100,000 people in the state of Washington. So if you want to have an encounter with a big guy, go to Mount Rainier or Mount Baker, or get up there to the PNW and see if you can't trudge around a little bit in Pacific Northwest. Which all that really tells us that Bigfoot doesn't mind the rain, because if you've ever been to Seattle, it rains nonstop. So he's okay with a perpetual drizzle, if you will.
Yeah, exactly. That's what it seems like. And so that's what's made me question the origins of this thing, because there are so many sightings where it really just does seem like an animal. It's out in the forest. It's in areas where it can get food and water, things that a physical body would need. But then there's other things, Nate, like you brought up, that it almost makes you think this thing is either from another planet or another dimension. So as far as like origins and just how to classify this thing, and I know we're definitely speculating here, but if you had to guess, what are some of your favorite possibilities? Like, is it earthborn? Is it somehow from another planet, another dimension? Is it just a spiritual creature? Is it part spiritual, part physical? We know that angels, they seem to have access to some type of human body if they want it, at least some type of human compatible body, if and when they want it to exist on our realm. So could it be a spiritual creature and all spiritual creatures have that capability? Is there a such thing as a spiritual animal, or are they all sentient? So lots of possibilities. But what do you guys think, with all your research and all the people that you've talked to? What things speak out to you the most?
Yeah, I think we spent a lot of time on our show talking about, like, what is a spiritual creature? What does that even mean, right? And I think that we've gone ad nauseum with Tim Alberino about trying to break these things down. Perhaps just technology that these creatures possess allows them to appear transdimensional, right? UFOs can go from they're in our sight, then they're not in our sight. These creatures are in our sight, then they're not in our sight. And we say things like, "Oh, it's interdimensional," but really, we don't really know what we're saying when we talk that way. It's sort of just like, "Oh, they're magic. They can perform magic," but we do know that they were physical enough to mate with humans. Angels were, and there's this whole property of they're building machines. Right? They're people will throw the spiritual sort of explanation on stuff, but it's like, why does a spiritual being that doesn't have any physical nature need a physical craft? It doesn't. Those two things don't really go together very well. So why is Bigfoot leaving dukes in the woods and stealing people's lunch
and thousands of footprints, Nate? Like thousands of footprints.
Yeah.
There's an absolute physicality to this thing. I think that you have to reckon with all of the woo stuff, right? Is it, a spirit doesn't leave footprints, and as you say, doesn't take big dukes in the woods that our friend Ken Walker puts in his freezer. That stuff is odd. Like you have to sort of justify that with the kind of hold all things equal and say what's happening here. And I think you point out the angelic thing, and I think that there's a lot of a lot of predication in the scriptures for angels doing physical things as well, right? Like walking into Sodom, or you have the whole Daniel 9 and 10 of the angel being held up by the prince of Persia, and then you go, okay, how does that work? Because as Nate said, like, if it's just ethereal and spiritual, you don't need to fly around in a craft. You don't need to be leaving footprints. You can kind of appear wherever you want to appear, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And those are the questions that boggle my mind too, and the things that I get really interested in. Because, there are times where, some of the stuff sounds so outlandish, it's difficult to believe. But then it's like, at the same time, when it's somebody who's not even seeking attention, it's like, what are the chances that they just made this up, and like for what reason? And of course, like any field, there are people where it's like, okay, I think he's just kind of trying to make a name for himself, or write a book or something. But I don't think that's the norm. Like, I think that's a very small minority of people who are involved in this thing. And those questions. Those questions are what keep me interested. Well, it's almost time to conclude for the free section here. But before we cut to members only, where can people find your podcast and follow you online?
Yeah, you can go to blurrycreatures.com, and that's the hub of what we do. There's a bunch of links there to all the different podcasts. We're slowly building up our YouTube. We've got about a third of our catalog on YouTube right now. And you can we're pretty at Blurry Creatures on social media. We got pretty much all of the handles. And blurrycreatures.com. Somehow we got the .com, and in the in the age of if you come up with a name, you can't get the .com, but it's easy to find us. And if you have Apple Podcasts or Spotify, we're on there as well. That's usually most of our listeners find us on those two places. So appreciate you, Josh, for having us on and talking to your listeners and fans, and thanks for having an open mind. And as you know, we're 4 years into this, so some of our ideas have evolved. So I know for the first time you listen to some guys talk about these things, think these guys are nuts, but we've heard from hundreds of experts and people who've had experiences on the ground, bizarre experiences. We usually only bring people on a show that have had the wild of the wild, and you just have to open your mind a little bit, because there's a lot we don't know, and we don't get a lot of information, from we're limited in what we know about the cosmos and the universe, and we try to fill it in with as much as we can through the biblical lens. But a lot of what we hear, if these people aren't lying, who knows? So appreciate it.
Yeah. I was like, find us on MySpace. Maybe you'll get in Nate's top 7, and make sure you find us on Friendster as well.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Well, those accounts are probably more rare than Bigfoot nowadays.
Oh, yeah.
But, we do still have some things to talk about. So we're going to have that in the members only section, as we're all out of time for the free part of the interview for today. But for those watching at home, if you haven't had a chance to yet, head on over to dailyrenegade.com and get a membership. It is only $10 a month or $100 a year. And if you can, I suggest doing the $100 a year, because it's actually cheaper in the long run. Essentially, you get 2 months free. You'll also get access to all of our full video stuff that we just cannot put on YouTube because they censor us, and this is why we had to do the whole dailyrenegade.com thing. And now you even get early access to videos, many times a full week in advance. So people who are viewing this now, this was available a week ago. So you want to make sure that you get that. There's lots of perks for being a member. That is dailyrenegade.com. If you are a member and are watching on the website, you don't have to do anything. Just hold on the line. We're going to continue our conversation. And to everyone else watching for free on YouTube, Rumble, or elsewhere, thank you so much, and we will see you next time.